Chapter 12. There, girl, that'll feel better. Nathaniel straightened up to pet the carriage mare. He'd been packing a poultice into her hoof. With the weather turning cold, the ground had stiffened to rock hard. Eden had taken her out to pull one of his finest chairs up and down the streets of Williamsburg, hoping to spark some interest in purchasing it. Keeping the horse at a smart trot to show how light and fast the carriage was, the pounding against the road had chipped up her hoof and made her limp. The horse nudged Nathaniel, her hot breath warming his face. He smiled and held still, enjoying the horse's gentle affection. Ever since he had protected her against Basil's bad driving, she'd been attached to him. I wager the Indians have names for people like you. He who speaks not to people but charms animals. Ben's voice made Nathaniel jump. He hadn't noticed Ben standing in the stable door. Or Basil probably knows some old fable by what's-his-name? Aesop? About a lowly stable boy who takes such good care of a donkey that the king makes him a duke, or whatever they came back in Greece. Ben clapped Nathaniel on the back and laughed good-naturedly. Now, if this old mare can get you to talk, surely I can as well, What say you, Nathaniel? Ben's humor eked a smile from Nathaniel. Aha! Ben put his hands on his hips as if to crow. The lad dost smile. Nathaniel blushed. Ben eased his teasing. I mean nothing by it, you know, Nathaniel. Let's be friends. I can use all the allies I can find in Eden's shop. In these changeable days, all we colonists are in need of friends. He put his hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, and Nathaniel did not pull back, like an easily spooked horse grateful for a sure-handed trainer. There's a bit of fun I want you to see in town, Nat. Come along. It was early evening. Nathaniel's chores were done. Basil was late coming home from his rounds, so it was unlikely there would be music or reading that night. But in town? I don't like taverns, Ben, Nathaniel murmured, thinking of the trouble he'd witnessed in the Ferryman's Inn and of the thrashings Ben had taken for frequent Williamsburgs. No taverns tonight, lad. This is a bonfire celebrating the triumph of King James over Catholic rebels. A company of boys I know have organized it. You mean Gunpowder Plot Day? Aye, Nat, the very same. Basil will be so pleased that you know your English history. Ben sobered abruptly. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. Of course you know that. You just came over the sea, didn't you? Did they celebrate Gunpowder Day at home? Nathaniel nodded. Commemorating the defeat of Guy Fawkes and his Catholic Lord conspirators had been an annual event in Yorkshire. Each November there had been a bonfire and dancing in the village. His mother had always held tight to his hand and taken him home when the revelers began enjoying their ale a bit too much, burning a huge stuffed straw doll, an effigy of the plot's leader. That's about the time the celebration turned nasty, and almost superstitious prejudices against people with different religious beliefs flared. Then you must come for certain. You will be our expert. Ben put his arm around Nathaniel's shoulders and propelled him out of the stable, through the back of the Maguire's small orchard, on to Nassau Street. I must admit, Nat, that I know little of the thinking behind the holiday, just that it celebrates foiling a plot to destroy the English Constitution. Well, Nathaniel hesitated, trying to remember the historical reasons for the festivities. Like so many annual revels, the initial reason for the event had been overtaken by the party itself. It had something to do with religion. Ben snorted. Didn't all England's troubles have something to do with religion? Let us hope that is something we can change here in America. Freedom to worship God as each person sees fit. I heard Burgess Jefferson talk on it at the Raleigh Tavern. But can't people do that already in Virginia? They can. Still, they are required to attend service in an Anglican church established by the Church of England, like Bruton Parish, at least once a month, or pay a large fine. And Baptists, Methodists, Catholics, and Jews are not exactly in the center of things in Virginia, are they? But go back to the Gunpowder Plot. Nathaniel searched his memory. There were Catholic lords who wanted to overthrow King James, I think, the Scottish king, after Elizabeth. I think he had been lenient toward Catholic practices at first. His mother, Mary of Scots had been Catholic, but then he changed his mind. Catholic nobles rented a house in London that had cellars directly beneath Parliament's House of Lords. They filled it with barrels of gunpowder and were planning to ignite it at the same time they captured King James's son and daughter. The idea was to kill the king, his advisors, and the Protestant members of Parliament all at once. But one of the conspirators realized they'd also kill lords sympathetic to Catholics. He warned one of them to stay away, so the king found out about the plot and arrested all of them. Ben nodded. I see. I warrant those involved were treated to the executioner. Aye, Nathaniel answered, shuddering at the practice of cutting a traitor open, drawing and quartering before hanging him. Somebody should have lit that powder sooner then, Ben said, in a strange mix of laughter and grim seriousness. Nathaniel was shocked. There was nothing funny about such a joke. Was Ben really so violent? He felt himself begin to recoil from the older boy when Ben sung out, Here we are! They'd come to the edge of town, past the main lawn of the college, where the land spread out in grassy fields. There was a good-sized fire blazing and a large crowd of youths jumping and skipping around it. Come on! Ben started trotting, and Nathaniel dutifully jogged behind. There you are, Ben! Cried out several boys, circling around them. Night's darkness had come. In the crackling light thrown from the fire, Nathaniel could only see half their faces. The rest were cast in shadows, making their expressions look slightly devilish. They were sweating from dancing close to the flames. Ben introduced them. Nathaniel, this is Beverly Dixon, son of the postmaster. This is Robert Greenhow of the store. Methinks Basil does books for your father sometimes. Am I right, Robert? The boy nodded. This is Henry Nicholson, and this, Ben patted the shoulder of a hulking, sour-faced boy, this is Jeremiah Noland. Do not let his jolly countenance fool you, Ben teased. Underneath this friendly exterior beats the heart of a beast. The other boys laughed. Jeremiah shoved Ben off. Brought you some tea, he snapped. If you didn't, you can't join us. I did, Ben answered stoutly, not at all shaken by the youth's threatening voice. Prove it. We're all free men's sons. You're just an apprentice. You have no money of your own. Where would you get tea? Ben drew himself up tall, but didn't respond to the taunt other than to pull a sack from his waistcoat. I have tea, he answered calmly, but there was a cold anger in his voice. Nathaniel gasped. He knew where that tea had come from. It belonged to Eden. Huzzah! The boy named Beverly cheered, breaking the tension. Your turn then, Ben. Come, throw it into the fire. He pulled Ben close to the flames and held up his hand to still the group. They stopped and listened. Mimicking older men, Beverly held on to the lapels of his coat and planted his feet wide apart. He cleared his throat dramatically and took on a deep, pompous voice. Gentlemen, herein we accept into our association of Protestant schoolboys the presence of one Benjamin Blythe, who will proclaim his loyalty to Virginia's resolve to not consume tea subject to tax by the crown. By throwing said tea into the fire, we will show our allegiance to American liberty, as well as to the good old English Constitution. Huzzah! The boys picked up the chant. Huzzah! Huzzah! Ben threw handfuls of tea into the fire, creating little flares and sizzles in the flames. The boys began dancing round the bonfire, chanting an old rhyme Nathaniel recognized. Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, 'twas in intent to blow up the king in Parliament. 70 barrels were laid below to prove old England's overthrow. By God's mercy he was catched with a darkened lantern and burning match. So holler boys, let the bells ring. Holler boys, God save the king. Only Jeremiah stood, watching Ben with a smoldering malice to match the fires. He turned on Nathaniel. Got you tea? Nathaniel vehemently shook his head no. Then back out of the circle. You don't belong. Nathaniel retreated. He watched from the shadows, confused. It made no sense to him that the boys would protest England's tea tax by celebrating a past king's victory over a man who was protesting oppression of Catholics. Nathaniel thought on the distrust still held against Catholics back home in England. They weren't allowed to vote or inherit property. The few Catholic families he knew of in Yorkshire disappeared from view around Guy Fawkes Day. Wasn't that even more unfair than a tax on tea? No, none of it made sense. He resolved to keep clear of it, despite the fact the boys were obviously having great fun. On the way home, Ben was flushed and excited. Nathaniel did like Ben. He worried for him. If Ben had stolen that tea, he was in for it. Ben? Ben stopped. The lad speaks! Huzzah! His loud merriment embarrassed Nathaniel. He fell silent again. Oh, Nat, I'm sorry. Ben stopped short. Nathaniel couldn't see his face in the gloom, but he knew Ben meant the apology. My teasing gets me into trouble all the time with people, like that arrogant boy, Jeremiah. My own fault with him, really. This summer, I was in town for Eden and passed through the market square. The boys were playing cricket. I stopped to watch for a while. Jeremiah was playing in the field. He kept trying to hit the wicket from way out there. He should have thrown it to a player closer in. He was just showing off. So they asked if I knew how to play. I answered that I did, having watched how that lad had fumbled things. A joke, but he didn't take it that way. He's been an enemy ever since. What did you want to say, Nat? Nathaniel hesitated, then blurted, Ben, where did you get the tea? Did you steal it from Master McGuire? He didn't explain that his concern was for Ben's safety. In the darkness, Ben's voice came back offended. I may be only an apprentice, Nathaniel, but I'm no thief. All the boys went about town asking citizens to donate their tea to our bonfire to show their resolve to abstain from British goods. I convinced Mistress McGuire to give it to me when I told her we'd be having a gunpowder plot bonfire. I told her 'twould be better for her to face the ire of her husband than the ill will of the town. Then Nathaniel knew just what giving away Eden's remaining tea supply would cost her in his foul temper and curt language. 'Tis true, Ben said defensively. He began walking in quick strides. The McGuires are being watched. They are disliked because of his close bond with Governor Dunmore. She needed to show support for our cause. He walked even faster. Besides, he muttered, it was the only way I could join up with the boys tonight. They're going to start a company of boy volunteers and drill on the green like the militia does. I can't miss it, Nathaniel. I can't. I want to be part of the fight, for a fight is coming, no matter how much they talk on reconciliation and goodwill for the king. Right now in Boston, British lobsterbacks occupy the city and crush the people. It's a pot waiting to boil over. It'll come, mark my words, and I'm going to be in it. All Americans who have any self-respect should be. Nathaniel had been almost running to keep up with Ben's long-legged stride, but he slowed and let Ben stalk off ahead, realizing that given time, with his dimpled smile and genuine easy manner, Ben could probably charm the fur off a bear. He'd get the wool off a lamb, like Mrs. McGuire or himself, in a minute. Nathaniel was going to be very careful of what he allowed Ben to talk him into doing. Part 4, January 1775. Goody Bull and her daughter together fell out. Both squabbled and wrangled and made a great rout. The old lady, it seems, took a freak in her head that her daughter, grown woman, might earn her own bread. The daughter was sulky and wouldn't come to, and pray what in this case could the old woman do? In vain did the matron hold forth in the cause that the young one was able, her duty, the laws. Ingratitude vile, disobedience far worse, but she might e'en as well sung psalms to a horse. Young, forward, and sullen, and vain of her beauty, she tartly replied that she knew well her duty, that other folks' children were kept by their friends, and that some folks love people but for their own ends. Hello, Goody, what ails you? Wake, woman, I say, I am come to make peace in this desperate fray. Adzooks, ope thine eyes, what a pother is here! You've no right to compel her, you have not, I swear. Come kiss the poor child, there come kiss and be friends. There kiss your poor daughter and make her amends. Colonial political words set to the world turned upside down. Chapter 13. The times and this town completely perplex me, Nathaniel. Here, lad, hold that mirror higher. I can't see to tie this cravat. Arg! Basil tore the long linen tie from his throat, nearly choking himself as he did so. He began again to wrap it around his shirt collar. Isn't it odd that all Williamsburg's leaders, many who are defying Parliament and harassing anyone drinking tea, are heading to the governor's palace tonight for a ball honoring the Queen's birthday? My students have talked of nothing else all week. Their households have been uproars of preparation. All the ladies have pulled out the silk dresses they are supposed to give up in favor of homespun cloth. How quickly principle gives way for a party! But I do suppose the ball will ease tension. No sane person wants this disagreement between us and Britain to grow. Look how easily the British bottled up Boston. Ah! He ripped the tie from his throat again. I have to tie this wretched thing correctly or I won't be able to breathe to play. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, exhaling slowly to calm himself. This time he managed to thread and weave the long tie correctly as he spoke. Of course, the evening is advantageous to me. This is the first time in years that Mr. Pelham has invited me to play flute to his harpsichord for dancing. There is to be an oboe, a French horn, and 2 violins as well. It will be thrilling to play in a real ensemble again, and it is a happy occasion after all, since Governor Dunmore is also celebrating the christening of his daughter. Clever of him to name her Virginia, don't you think? That certainly charmed the city, that and his parading back into town last month as conqueror of the Shawnee. I hear he might even have some of his Indian captives there in native dress to entertain his guests. The man is wily. All these displays make citizens forgive what a disagreeable braggart he is. Hold the mirror up again, lad, so I can see to this hair. I suppose I should have a wig, but then I would have needed the barber to shave my head. It does make one so cold in the winter. Basil had washed his hair. Now strands of it stood out every which way as he brushed. He rolled his eyes. I'm not made for court, Nathaniel. In appearance or conversation, I find it too confusing. Our leaders calling the members of Parliament villains, at the same time praising Lady Dunmore for her beauty and wit. It's hard to know what opinion is safe. Nathaniel nodded, agreeing with Basil. It was hard to know what was safe to say or do these days. No matter what the choice, you were sure to offend someone. Conversations with Ben, for instance, were nearly impossible, since Ben saw everything in black and white absolutes, and anything short of revolution was cowardice or betrayal to him. Basil put down the brush with a snort, giving up. Of course, it's not likely that any of the guests would speak to me tonight in any case. Tonight I am simply one of the household servants and slaves. Out of a box he pulled a gray queue, a long, thick braid of hair, neatly finished with 2 large black ribbons, a cheaper alternative to a wig. Basil tied the hairpiece on his head with a string. This cost me a month's wages. It's made of yak hair from Tibet. Goodness knows what human hair would have cost. He stroked it a moment. Soft, though, now powdered to hide the string. With a large puff, Basil dusted his head, making a snowstorm of white powder. Ka-choo! Oh dear, we will have to get this powder off the floor. Ka-choo! Hand me that rag, Nathaniel. Ka-choo! 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 The queue nearly fell off Basil's head as he wheezed. Nathaniel watched in astonishment. He'd seen fine gentlemen thus dressed and powdered, but he'd never before seen the process. Finally, free of sneezes, Basil laughed at himself. Who needs snuff when one has powder, hey lad? Know you the song The World Turned Upside Down? They've changed the words to politics recently, but the original words went, he thought a moment, then sang, if boats were on land, churches on sea, if ponies rode men, and if grass ate the cows, if summer were spring and the other way round, then all the world would be upside down. That's how I feel, all dandified, completely out of sorts. But my music will make me a place of belonging. They won't be able to dance without me. Basil took a blue wool coat from the bedstead and shook it out before putting it on. It was pleated and long down to his knees. There, how do I look? He asked Nathaniel. Still like a grasshopper, all arms and legs, thought Nathaniel, but he answered, very calmly, master. Basil smiled. Aye, sir. There was a large crash downstairs, and the sound of something rolling along the floor. Basil sighed. Mistress Maguire has been so upset. She's been dropping things all day. She is disappointed not to be invited to the ball. You would think the governor could invite the Maguires, since there is only one house between his and his palace gate. Even though the Maguires are from the middling class, this house is as fine as many belonging to the landed gentry. But Lord Dunmore obviously follows the European code. Only those born to privilege may enjoy it. He forgets that America was founded as the land of opportunity, a new world where everyone has the chance to pursue a better life. Work hard and prosper, and welcome to the upper class. But tonight all those ideas seem to have been put away. Tonight we revert to the old ways. Another crash and clatter. Basil sighed. I had better make my way to the palace, lad. I think my preparations make her feel worse. He picked up the satchel in which he carried his recorder and Nathaniel's German flute. Wish me good fortune, Nathaniel. Tonight I play for the mighty, and with your flute I will play all the better. He made a flourishing bow to Nathaniel, as if he were governor, only to catch one of his pleats on the door handle, yanking the door to thwack his backside. Ah me, mumbled Basil as he made a more humble exit. Nathaniel almost laughed out loud. Through the bedroom window, Nathaniel watched Basil walk up the green to the governor's palace. To see Basil go all the way through the ornate gates with its lion and unicorn statues and royal seal, past the liveried footmen awaiting carriages, Nathaniel pressed his nose to the window pane. The coldness of the glass startled him into pulling back. Seeing he'd left a nose print, Nathaniel hurriedly polished it away with his shirt sleeve. Nathaniel stepped back to marvel for the 100th time at the huge windows, 6 panes tall and 3 panes wide. As awe-inspiring as the governor's mansion was, the Maguires' 2-story clapboard house had seemed a king's castle to him. With plaster and paint on the inner walls and glass in the windows, the Maguires' home was beyond anything Nathaniel had ever imagined living in. His own cottage in Yorkshire had been cozy, warmed with firelight and his mother's love, but it had been just one large room with a loft. There was nothing to decorate the stone walls. They were the same on the inside as the outside. The floor was dirt, the windows merely open holes closed up with shutters against the cold. Night was falling, darkening the room quickly. Nathaniel lit a tallow candle by the small fire flickering in the bedroom's hearth. Resting the pewter candle holder beside the pitcher basin on the table, he pulled the trundle bed out from underneath Basil's. Having it, too, was an unaccustomed treat. In Yorkshire, his mother had stuffed a bedding tick with goose down and sweet-smelling lavender for him, but it lay upon the cold dirt floor. He paused, remembering how once, when he was about 5 years old, a garden snake had crawled into the house and his very bed for warmth. His father had snored through the invasion, refusing to wake. It'd been his delicate mother who'd beaten the snake to death with a fire tongue. Then, with her usual calm, she rocked Nathaniel back to sleep singing. He'd never told his mother that she had so astonished him with her sudden ferociousness that for a while he'd been quite afraid of her. He took off his stockings and breeches, folded them carefully to place on the closet shelf, and quickly slid under the blanket in his shirt and bare feet. Snuggling in, he pulled his mother's Bible out from under his pillow and hugged it to his chest. They might have been poor, subject to garden snakes, damp, cold, and hunger, but his childhood cottage still seemed a safer place to Nathaniel. There he had his mother's love and his parents to make decisions. He knew what to expect. Here the world indeed seemed upside down, on the brink of such upheaval, an upheaval that could swallow up people like Ben and tear apart the little bit of stability Nathaniel knew. What would Basil do if fighting came, as Ben predicted and longed for? Nathaniel closed his eyes against his fear. He imagined playing his flute while his mother listened, her bright blue eyes dancing with joy. He slipped into peaceful Yorkshire dreams.